It was a Sunday evening in October. I was at the kitchen table with a cost estimate spread in front of me, something to do with a commercial remodel I was bidding in the morning. The kind of work that follows you home, whether you want it to or not. My phone rang around 7:30, and I picked it up without looking because I was in the middle of a column of numbers. It was Helen, Diane's mother. She sounded cheerful, a little tired the way she always did, but genuinely happy to be calling. She asked what time Diane was planning to arrive, said she hadn't seen her in over a month and was looking forward to the company. She mentioned she'd made up the guest room. I told her I'd have Diane call when she was closer to the house. We said our goodbyes and hung up. I sat there for probably 30 seconds looking at the wall above the refrigerator. Then I picked the phone back up and texted Diane. She replied in under a minute. "Already at Mom's, everything's fine, I'll call you tomorrow." The reply came too fast for someone 3 hours away. You don't text back that quickly from a moving car, and if you've stopped somewhere, you say so. I noticed it, and then I told myself I was being stupid. Maybe Helen had the dates wrong. She was in her mid-70s and not well. Maybe Diane had called ahead and told her a different arrival time. I set the phone face down and went back to the estimate. I didn't get any more work done that evening. We'd been married 17 years. No kids, we talked about it early on and let the conversation drift, the way couples do when neither person pushes hard enough. Diane managed the house and the social calendar, and when I fell behind at the office, she'd sit at the kitchen table and sort through my invoices and organize them into stacks I could actually use. She was good at that kind of thing, practical in her own way. I'd started the construction business about 20 years back, 3 years before Diane and I got serious, with 2 guys, a used truck, and a line of credit I was genuinely nervous about. By the time we got married, it was already established. By now, it had grown into a 12-person operation that produced a reliable income. Diane had full access to a household account I replenished without asking where the money went. That was the arrangement, and for most of our marriage, I thought it was a reasonable one. I was busy. She managed things at home. Neither of us spent much time questioning the structure of it. Her mother's health had been declining for about a year before any of this started. A series of things, nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to require real attention. When Helen had a bad spell the previous winter, I told Diane to go and stay as long as she needed to. I meant it. I sent extra money for whatever Helen needed. The visits became regular, every other weekend, sometimes stretching to 3 or 4 days. I never questioned it because it seemed like exactly the wrong thing to do. A man doesn't interrogate his wife for caring for her sick mother. That was the thing I kept coming back to, sitting at that kitchen table after Helen hung up. I had been proud of myself for not being that kind of husband. I opened the shared phone account on my laptop. I told myself I was looking for the bill, which was technically true. It took me about 5 minutes to find what I wasn't looking for. One number appeared across 8 months of records in a pattern I couldn't explain. Dozens of calls and texts, clustered in the evenings, and on the exact weekends Diane was supposed to be sitting with her mother 3 hours north. I pulled up a basic reverse lookup. The number came back registered to a man. I took screenshots of everything. Methodically, the way you document anything in business before you act on it. You capture the record first because the record is what you'll need later. The name was Cole. That was all I had. It was enough to know I wasn't going back to the estimate. I didn't call Diane back. I let her text stand and I went to bed at a reasonable hour and I lay there in the dark for a while and then I went to sleep because I have learned over 20 years of running a business that exhausted decisions are usually bad ones. In the morning, I had a bid to submit. After that, I had a phone call to make, not to Diane and not to a lawyer. A former client named Dennis had mentioned, offhandedly on a job site about 2 years back, that he'd used a private investigator during his divorce. He'd said the man was thorough and discreet and didn't pad his hours. I'd filed the detail away without thinking I'd ever need it. I dug Dennis's number out of my contacts that Monday morning and called him between the bid meeting and lunch. Dennis gave me the name and I called that afternoon. I met the pie, I'll call him Ray, at his office, which was the kind of functional, unimpressive space that suggested he spent most of his time working and very little F it trying to look like anything. I laid out what I had: Cole's name, his approximate location 2 hours west of us, Diane's description and her car, and the phone record screenshots printed on paper the way Ray asked me to bring them. I told him what I needed. Not a report, not a summary. Photographs that could be attached to a legal filing. "I understand the scope," he said. We agreed on a rate. That was the whole meeting, maybe 20 minutes. The next several days were ordinary on the surface. I went to work. I answered the business line. I sent Diane routine texts about nothing. She came home Sunday evening, asked about my week, made dinner. I told her the bid had gone well and asked if her mother seemed better. "She seemed more comfortable than last month," she said. I nodded and let it go. Then, about 10 days later, Diane mentioned over dinner that she thought she'd head back up to see her mother the coming Friday, probably return Sunday. Helen needed her, she said. She'd sounded tired on the phone. I said, of course, take all the time she needed. That evening, I messaged Ray. He found Cole's property within a day, a lake cabin, remote, on a rural access road that wasn't visible from the highway. Cole's family had owned it for years. It was isolated enough that visitors wouldn't be noticed. Ray drove out to assess the location Thursday, and Friday evening the updates started coming through by text. Cole's truck arrived first. Diane's car arrived about 20 minutes after. I was sitting in the back office at my shop when those texts came in. I didn't reply, I just watched the phone. Ray sent periodic updates for the next hour or so. Then, after another hour, he found the window angle and the photograph came through. I looked at it for a long moment. It was Diane and it was Cole, and it was exactly what I had paid to confirm. I saved the image. I texted Ray one word, "Good." I put the phone in my desk drawer. I'll say this plainly because it's honest. There's a specific feeling that comes with a suspicion becoming a fact. It isn't quite what you'd expect. The anger was there, but underneath it was something more like a door closing, a quiet, mechanical sound in the back of your head when something that could still have been explained is no longer explainable. I sat with it for a few minutes, and then I moved to the next problem, because that's what I know how to do. The next problem had a Facebook profile. I asked Ray for Cole's full last name. With it, I spent about 20 minutes searching before I found what I was looking for. A woman named Grace appeared in Cole's profile regularly, standing next to him in the kinds of photographs couples take at family occasions, backyard cookouts, kids' birthdays, a school event. 3 children. A life that looked, from the outside, entirely ordinary. I stared at the profile for a moment. Then I opened a new message. I want to explain why I contacted Grace, because it would have been easier not to. The clean move was to take the photograph straight to a divorce attorney file and let the legal process handle everything without Cole's household ever knowing what I knew. I keep my head down, get my settlement. Cole keeps his family, Grace keeps her marriage, and everyone who didn't choose to be in this situation gets to stay ignorant of the part they played in it. That was the simpler path. I couldn't do it, not because I needed her help, though it turned out I did, because she deserved the same information I had. She was living in the same lie Diane had been building for 8 months. I didn't know Grace, but I knew that if I sat on what I had and said nothing, I was choosing her ignorance for her. That didn't sit right with me. I kept the message short. 3 sentences. I had information about our spouses that she deserved to know. I had photographs. Would she be willing to meet somewhere public? I left my name and my number. She replied within a few hours. She said yes. We met at a coffee shop in a town roughly between us. Grace was composed. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the composure of someone who had no idea what was coming. The composure of someone who had been carrying a low-level suspicion for a while and had gotten very good at holding her face still around it. I put the photographs on the table without any preamble and gave her a moment. She went very still. Then she went cold in a way I recognized because I had felt it myself 4 days earlier, alone in the back office with my phone in my hand. It's a particular shift, not toward grief, not right away, but toward clarity. The suspended question that's been floating in the air finally lands somewhere solid. We talked for about 2 hours. Grace filled in the details. I didn't have. Cole's excuse for the weekends away was supply runs for the family property, the kind of errand that doesn't invite follow-up questions. She mentioned cash withdrawals over the past several months. He said T was cabin maintenance, she told me. I accepted it because it was plausible. She said she'd noticed him become more careful with his phone about 8 months ago. 8 months. The timeline matched exactly. I told her my side, the visits to Helen, the extra money I'd sent for medical bills, the phone records, Helen's phone call that started all of this. Grace listened without interrupting. By the time we were both finished, the shape of the whole thing was clear to both of us. The plan came together practically, the way any plan does when the people involved know what they want and don't need to convince each other. Diane would announce another visit within a week or two. I knew the pattern well enough to predict it. When Ray confirmed they were at the cabin, I would call Grace. She knew about the cabin. Cole had taken the kids there once a few years ago, called it the family fishing spot. She knew the access road. I told her I wasn't driving out there to have a conversation. She understood what I meant and didn't ask me to elaborate. That same week, I met with a divorce attorney. I brought copies of everything, the phone records, the photographs, Ray's written account of the surveillance. My attorney reviewed the photographs and confirmed they were sufficient for the filing. "These will hold up," he said. "When you're ready, call me." I told him to be ready. We agreed I'd call when I had a date. I drove home that evening and Diane made dinner, and we talked about a neighbor's renovation project and whether we should get the gutters cleaned before winter. 3 days after the cafe meeting, she mentioned at dinner that she was thinking of heading to her mother's the following weekend. "Helen sounded tired on the phone," she said. "I think she needs the company." "That sounds like a good idea," I told her. That evening, I texted Ray. Friday afternoon, Ray sent me the confirmation. Cole's truck at the cabin. Diane's car parked beside it arrived 20 minutes after his. I called Grace. She said she was ready. We agreed on a gas station a few miles from the access road and drove out separately. The drive took about 2 hours. I wore work clothes, jeans, boots, a flannel shirt, because I hadn't seen any reason to change. I had Ray's photographs on my phone. I had my attorney's number in my recent calls. The afternoon was clear and cool, and the access road was unpaved and ran through about a quarter-mile of trees before the cabin came into view, single-story, wood-sided, a truck and a sedan parked on the gravel patch beside it. Grace and I didn't say anything at the gas station beyond confirming we were both there. We walked toward the cabin together. The front door was unlocked. What happened next I'll describe in the same plain way I've described everything else, because it isn't the part of the story I'm proud of, and it also isn't the part I regret. Cole came off the couch when we came through the door. I put him on the floor. Grace went for Diane. It was brief and it was ugly, and inside of 2 minutes it was over. Cole and Diane ended up on the floor. Luke and Grace were standing. And the cabin was quiet in a specific way that rooms get quiet when the worst thing that can happen in them has already happened. Before I walked out, I looked at Diane. She was already starting to say something, my name, probably, or some version of an explanation she'd been rehearsing for months. "Don't bother calling Helen for support," I said. "She doesn't know where you've been either." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the front door. Outside, Grace and I stood on the gravel for a moment. I told her I'd send her a full copy of Ray's documentation, the photos, the phone records, all of it. "I'd appreciate that," she said quietly. We got in our respective cars and drove away in different directions. I called my attorney from the highway. He answered on the second ring. "File it," I told him. "I'll start the paperwork tonight," he answered. I had made certain calculations before I drove out there, and I want to be clear about one of them. I knew that what happened in that cabin created potential legal exposure for me. I also knew that Cole was not going to call a sheriff's department and explain to a responding officer the specific domestic circumstances that had brought 2 aggrieved spouses to his family's private cabin on a Friday afternoon. That calculation proved correct. No report was ever made. I did not go home that night. I drove to a colleague's place, a guy named Isaac who had been through his own divorce a few years back and understood, without my having to explain much, what had just happened. I slept in his guest room. Before I went to sleep, I sent Diane a single text. I'd be in touch through my attorney. She called 17 times before midnight. I know because I was awake for most of them. I did not answer. I filed the following week. Ray's photographs went in with the filing timestamp. D. Geotagged, taken from a position that established location and identity without any ambiguity. My attorney described them as the kind of documentation that tends to accelerate a divorce settlement rather than prolong it, because there is very little productive argument to be made against a photograph. Diane retained her own attorney. Her first move was to characterize what happened at the cabin as evidence of instability on my part, volatile behavior, a pattern of control, that kind of framing. Her attorney dropped that angle quickly once he actually reviewed the filing and understood what was attached to it. You don't walk into a courtroom holding a characterization of a husband's behavior when the husband's paperwork includes time-stamped proof of an 8-month affair. That's not a sympathetic position. Her attorney's next move was the one I'd expected. 17 years of marriage, no employment history, significant financial dependence. The position argued for substantial alimony and a major share of the marital assets. My attorney had spent the previous weeks preparing for exactly that. The construction business was founded 3 years before the marriage. I had financial records going back to the very beginning, before Deanne and I had even gotten serious. The marital home was purchased with capital drawn from the business. The documentation was clear and unbroken. We were in a state where marital misconduct factors into property division, and it did. I'm not going to claim I walked away whole. Divorce is expensive regardless of who is right, and contentious divorces are more expensive than that. But the business was protected. The thing I'd spent 20 years building was defensible, and I defended it. What Diane had not accounted for, across 17 years of assuming the marriage was her financial floor, was the difference between a husband who feels guilty and a husband who has photographs. Then Cole's situation came apart. Grace had filed simultaneously with her own attorney and Cole's financial reality. The family home, 3 children, 2 separate legal proceedings, his own mounting fees landed on him all at once. The version of Cole that Diane had constructed in her mind, the man who had chosen her, the man who might eventually leave Grace and build something real with her, that version stopped answering her calls. Not gradually, the way relationships sometimes wind down. He simply stopped. The calls went to voicemail. The texts weren't returned. Grace sent me a brief message a few weeks after both filings. Grim and specific, the way she always was. Cole's attorney had apparently stated, as part of his client's position in the divorce proceedings, that he had no serious intention of leaving his marriage, and that his involvement with Diane carried no emotional significance beyond a lapse in judgment. He was protecting himself the only way he knew how. Diane was the only person involved who hadn't known that was always the plan. Helen found out the truth. I didn't call her, I didn't have to, and it wouldn't have been right. Diane eventually had to provide some explanation for why I had filed and what the filing contained. I don't know exactly what Diane said to her mother, and I don't know exactly what Helen said back. What I know is that the woman whose illness had been used as cover for 8 months of lies, whose health and doctor's appointments and genuine need for company had given Diane a story that a trusting husband would never think to question, learned in full how her condition had been used. Helen stopped speaking to Diane. Whether that lasts, I can't say with certainty. But it happened, and it didn't surprise anyone who understood what Diane had actually done. The final calls with my attorney wrapped up on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I took the call from a job site, a residential addition out in the county, a 2-man crew doing framing while I walked the property with the client. I stepped away and handled the legal call, confirmed the final terms, and thanked my attorney for his work. "You handled this as well as anyone could have," he said before he hung up. I didn't have much to say to that. I thanked him again and hung up. I walked back to where my crew was working and stood there for a moment, looking at the framing going up against a clear sky. I noted what I no longer had: 17 years of a shared life, the domestic routine, the version of the future I'd had in my head for a long time. I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me about that. I'm just saying it plainly because it's true. I also noted what I had, which was the business still running, a crew on a job site, a legal outcome I could live with, and the specific knowledge that I found out what was happening and stopped the damage before it went any further. That mattered. My client came back around the corner with a question about the window placement on the south wall. I answered it. We walked the framing together. I went back to work.